Hello, everyone. I'm Lana Costantini, Deputy Director here at the San Francisco Historical Society. I'd like to welcome all of you here for a presentation about the history of baseball in San Francisco. Our Executive Director, Todd Mayberry, would have loved to have been here. He's still out on paternity leave, so he couldn't join us tonight, but I told him I'd give everyone his regards. We're really excited about the presentation tonight, and judging by the signups, other people are too. We have almost a full house here today, and we have more than 100 people online from a number of different states. We have people from Texas, Virginia, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Washington State, in addition, of course, to California. I'd also like to thank our supporters to History Live. They're the ones who allow us to keep making these videos and having these presentations and keep them free for everyone. We have a new supporter as of this week, which is the San Francisco Giants. And when they heard about our presentation, they donated a number of items such as this baseball signed by Will Clark, bat autographed by Young-Hoo Lee, a baseball jersey, which is signed by Matt Chapman. So all of these items are going to be part of our auction for our annual luncheon in October if you're interested in bidding on any of these great things. So keep your eye out for an announcement. Our luncheon will take place on October 23rd of this year. Another new sponsor is Chairman of our Board of Directors, Tom Owens, and his wife, Darcy. And any donations made tonight will be matched by the Darcy and Tom Owens Family Trust. So if anyone feels generous and would like to make a donation online, please feel free to do that. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker, Lincoln Mitchell. This is the third time Lincoln has presented for us, and we're very happy to have him back tonight. Lincoln is a lecturer at the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University. Lincoln has written 9 books about U.S. foreign policy, baseball, and the politics and history of San Francisco. He grew up in San Francisco, graduated from Stewart Hall and University High School before earning his BA from UC Santa Cruz and his PhD from Columbia. So, without further ado, please welcome Lincoln Mitchell.
Thank you, and it is really great to be back at the San Francisco Historical Society. I enjoy presenting here for a lot of reasons. One is it's just fun to talk about one's work, or in this case, just to talk about baseball. But also, I have a kind of long-time spiritual connection to the San Francisco Historical Society. Some of you, the first San Franciscan I ever met was Charles Fracchia, who I met sometime in the late 1960s, I believe, in New York. And then Charles Fracchia Jr. is my lifelong friend, and compared to him, I just have a passing interest in baseball and the San Francisco Giants. So Charles, good to see you. When I used to work in politics, a cardinal rule was don't spend 10 minutes welcoming, state senator so-and-so and district leader so-and-so. But then there's another set of rules that says you should always honor thy mother and thy father. So I want to welcome my mother, Susan Mitchell, who is here tonight, and my stepfather, John Sikorsky. I want to start by saying that my colleague Stephen Goldman, who some of you may know, who's kind of a baseball philosopher, says frequently that baseball is everything and everything is baseball, which is to say you can understand the world through baseball, and you can certainly understand San Francisco through baseball. However, don't have the bandwidth to do that in this short amount of time tonight. So this is really going to be an overview. And some of you are going to say, I know a lot of that stuff already. Some of that are going to say this is too deep in the weeds, and you can't please all the people all the time, but you're going to have to just bear with me, and I hope that everyone gets something about this and that we can take a minute. The Giants are on a 2-game winning streak, which in 2026 terms is like a 15-game winning streak for a normal baseball team. So that's very exciting. They've scored, 11 runs in the last 2 games, which for a normal baseball team is like 40 runs in the last 2 games. So things are looking up. And I want to begin, because this is baseball season now, with some warm-ups. and we have a bat and a ball. So I'm just gonna hit some fungos to everybody. No, but I'll tell you a funny story about warm-ups. I decided, so my son lives out here, and there's an American ritual of fathers playing catch with sons. It's one of the really great delights of fatherhood. When your son is throwing in the high 80s with curveballs, it's not as fun when you're an old man anymore. But I decided I would bring my baseball glove out and we would throw together. And yesterday, we threw for about 20 minutes, and then he threw so hard, he broke my baseball glove. And I said to him, this thing, I've had this since 1979, and then you broke it, but, so the leather just kind of wore out. Anyway, so we're not going to actually do any throwing and catching, but we are going to do some warm-ups, and we're going to begin with these three seminal events in San Francisco Giants history. So that's Game 7 of the 1962 World Series, Game 5 of the 1989 NLCS, and Game 5 of the 2010 World Series. And I just want to do this to get our baseball juices flowing. So
line drive to second base. The Yanks have won the World Series. As Bobby Richardson grabs that line drive.
Okay, so just while we pause on that of course is Game 7 of the 1962 World Series. The Giants lost that game 1-0 with the tying run on third and the winning run on second base, and the winning run in the person of Willie Mays. The batter, of course, is Willie McCovey. And about a few months after this, Peanuts, remember that cartoon, ran a comic strip where Charlie Brown was just sulking. And in the fourth and final panel of just him not saying anything, he says, if only McCovey had hit that ball 3 feet higher. Then 2 months later, he ran the exact same strip, and if only McCovey hit that ball 1 foot higher. So Willie McCovey, who believed he never hit a ball harder in his life, and Bobby Richardson was right there and caught it. Charles Fracchia was at that game. I learned very late in Charles Fracchia's life. So there was a San Francisco Historical Society connection. But here's a great San Francisco footnote to that story, to that ball game. And then I want to put that in some context. But let me just tell a quick story here. I realize I should watch the time already, because you've got me started talking about baseball. So at Columbia, I teach a course with Hillary Clinton. Not like we're on the lecture together, but I help with the course. I teach some of the sections. And once a year, she meets with kind of the teaching team. And one of these years, she and I got in a long discussion about Willie Mays. And my younger colleagues were like, what are you doing? We wanted to talk about foreign policy, and you're talking baseball? And I said, that's who I am. Anyway, at this game, Game 7, they were playing the Yankees. And the Yankees, before this game, this was happening, there was something else going on at this time that wasn't quite as important, but still was in the news, the Cuban Missile Crisis. So around this time, the Yankees players are receiving death threats. So the SFPD is charged with, making sure that nothing happens to these players. So after the game, various police officers were dispatched to, in their cars to get the players to the airport, get on the plane, and get out of here before anything happened. And I talked to the police officer who was charged with making sure Bobby Richardson, the guy who caught that ball, and Tony Kubek, the shortstop on that team, both of them were great fielders. None of them could really hit. Neither of them could really hit. And to get them to the airport. And he said they were driving along. They could not have been more gracious. This was the best team we ever played. And all this guy could think is, I'm so angry. Like, I just wanted them to win the game. I don't care about being gracious. The footnote is that police officer was Frank Jordan, who became the mayor of San Francisco and in 1993, helped keep the city here. So helped keep the team here. So now I want to talk about, so that was the 5th year the Giants were in San Francisco. And there was this sense after they lost that this is a great team. They have Mays, they have McCovey, they have Cepeda, they have Juan Marichal. They're going to be back. They walked off that field losing a World Series by as small a margin as you possibly can. Willie McCovey never played in the World Series again. Willie Mays played in the World Series 11 years later with a different team. Juan Marichal never played in the World Series again. They never made it back. And that's kind of the heartbreak of the 60s for the Giants. There's heartbreak for the Giants mostly in every decade except the 2010s. I want to move here to this one.
Off second, Thompson from first in the pitch, and Clark hits it up the middle and a center field base hit. Maldonado scores. Here comes Butler on his way to third as Thompson. The Giants lead 3-1, and Superman has done it again.
Okay, so I love that call. The one that gets the most clicks on YouTube is Vin Scully. Right, he was announcing for the networks. That's Hank Greenwald, great announcer for the Giants. And I wanted that because he said, Superman has done it again. Will Clark was just awesome in that NLCS. So, was anybody here at that game? Just Charles and I? A couple of others? Good, good. So there were about, I think, 52,000 people at that game. 51,500 had better seats than Charles and I. But we were, in fact, at that ball game. And this got them back to the World Series for the first time in 27 years and was, for my money, perhaps the most exciting single moment in San Francisco Giants history until this next video. And we could discuss that. And I want to return to Will Clark a little bit later because I believe Will Clark has a particularly important role in San Francisco Giants history that is often overlooked. I will also tell you, and we can have this discussion, but there are many players in the Hall of Fame who are not as good as Will Clark was. Okay. So we will go to this. Some of you may recall this one.
Saves, no earned runs this postseason, and it's all on him. Here's the 0-2. Right down the middle, struck him out, low away. And the Giants are 2 outs away. Hard hit, but right-hand Renteria. He may be the MVP. 2 out. Here it is. Struck him out. And for the first time since 1954, the Giants are world champions.
Okay, I'm sure most of you remember that, right? That's the Game 5 of the 2000. I can see the smiles on everyone's faces just bringing that up. And that was the first time the Giants won the World Series in San Francisco. The first time, 1954, they, of course, won. They were the New York Giants. Many people know me and my sons in New York as the biggest Giants fans in their lives. And when they won the World Series, my sons were much younger, and they treated us as if, my sons were on the team, and I was like playing shortstop or something, or first base. But they could not believe the Giants had never won the World Series their whole time in San Francisco before then, because they thought it's such a good team with Mays and all these great players. But that was, in fact, the first time they won the World Series. And, of course, they won it again in 2012 and 2014 and had this mini dynasty. But I want to turn now to the early years. And this is just a photograph of a ball. Anyone know what ballpark that is? What playground that is? It's Rossi Park. No reason you would necessarily know that. So we were chatting earlier with somebody here, and my theory on many things is that there's no first of anything, right? No first rock and roll song, no first poem, no first hamburger, right? There's no real first of anything. So there's no real first baseball game in San Francisco. So I'm not going to try to answer that question. But the first one that was like reported on and in depth and with the scores and descriptions was February 22nd, 1860. Now, to put that in perspective, and this feels more like a football game because the score was 33-33, right? So I think the Giants bullpen this year. No, this 33-33 ended in a tie, and it was the Red Rovers and the Eagles, and they played at a field called Centers Bridge at 16th and Harrison. To put this in perspective, it was 14 years after, a little bit less, about 13 years and 10 months, after the Elysian Fields in 1846, which is understood as the first ballpark where baseball was played. That was in New Jersey. So pretty early on, baseball in some structured way is being played in San Francisco. This is before the Civil War. Note how it's February, and of course there's records of baseball being played earlier, but we start here. February, where you're not playing baseball in many parts of the country in February, but here in California you can. So that this is the very earliest, but I want to just talk for a second because the history of baseball in San Francisco is a very broad topic, right? If we talk about the history of the San Francisco Giants, I've written, books on that, and you can and should read those books. But I want to get a little more broad. So because for me, baseball is many streams leading somewhere. It is the stream that gets us from, the early National League to Shohei Ohtani. It is the stream of the Negro Leagues that brings us great players like Cool Papa Bell and Josh Gibson and Satchel Paige. Some of them end up feeding into that stream with Jackie Robinson and becoming part of the National League and the American League. Others never get that opportunity. Then that stream gets closed off. But one stream about baseball is just playing it ourselves. And for many of us who love the game, playing it ourselves is a big part of that. So I want to just talk for a moment about sandlots and strikeout. So the term sandlot, everyone has heard that term. is believed to have originated here in San Francisco. And the reason for that, so how many of you played baseball in San Francisco as a kid, even like not even a team or just with your friends or anything? Once again, the primal injustice of baseball is that girls and women were excluded from the very beginning, right? This is the original sin of baseball that it is never reconciled with, for my money. So I really noticed the gendered answers there. I don't think I'm overlooking that. But if you did play baseball here, particularly in the western part of the city, when you dug in the batter's box, if you were, oh, can I use this bat? If you dug in the batter's box when you were hitting, or to get ready in the infield, or I didn't pitch much, but on the pitcher's mound, you noticed it wasn't dirt under your feet. It was sand, because those had all been dunes. That's where the term sandlot comes in, because in the western part of the city, it's mostly sand. Sandlot refers to informal baseball. It's not even like your Little League team or your CYO. A lot of it's a very Catholic city. It's a funny city because the Catholics play baseball at the JCC and the Jews go to Catholic school. That's why I love San Francisco. But in terms, Sandlot refers to very unorganized, just for fun baseball. And then, how many of you played strikeout as a kid? Remember this? Yeah. In the East Coast, they play stickball. We played strikeout. And I just want to remember that. And strikeout, for those of you who don't remember, here I am going to use this bat, sorry, Jung-Hoo, is one guy's at bat, and then, 50 or 60 feet away, depending how big you are, how old you are, is another guy with either a tennis ball or a beat-up hard ball. And then behind you, because in the plate in the schoolyard, chalked on the wall, or maybe if you're lucky, someone spray painted it and someone left it there, is a strike zone. And the pitcher pitches, and the batter, you try to strike the batter out before the batter either walks or hits. It's a one-on-one form of baseball. Great for your arm. Throwing 100 tennis balls 100 times in a night, that'll knock out your arm for life. And then if you hit it past this line, it's a single, double, triple home run. So it's the San Francisco. We weren't playing on the street so much, although we did that with running bases, but we played strikeout in the schoolyards. So I want to talk about some of the early ballparks. First, Valencia and 16th, right? Geary and Masonic, right where the Muni Yard is now. And then Seal Stadium, 16th, and Bryant. And my friend Mark and I, who's here today, a couple years ago, we did the 3-ballpark walk. And I recommend this. We charted this out. Mark is my walking friend. He used to be my baseball friend. Well, he's still my baseball friend, but we used to play strikeout in the Sandlots, and now we walk because we're old. But we walked from where Candlestick Park was to Seal Stadium to Oracle Park, and then we caught a Giants game. It's about 8 miles. It's a great day if you can do it. We did it in that order because it made sense geographically rather than the chronology, which would go Seal Stadium, back to Candlestick, back to Oracle. But so baseball's been around in San Francisco for a long time. I think we can safely say that. And I want to talk a little bit now about the Pacific Coast League. It was not a minor league. Everyone knows that? When people from the East Coast say, well, the PCL was like, no, not true. It was essentially a third major league. And it seems obvious now that it couldn't be a third major league because it wasn't the National League and the American League. Tell that to the people here at the time. Players went back and forth. Lefty O'Doul, that's who that photograph is, the longtime manager of the Seals, was a great, great hitter. But he would play for a while in the National League, come back to the PCL, go back to the National League, hit well above 300 or 340 wherever he played. So the guy could hit. And they, because it was the West Coast, they could play longer seasons. So he has 170-game seasons because of the climate out here. It was pretty stable. There were a couple teams in Los Angeles, Oakland, Sacramento, Seattle, San Francisco. And it was a quality of play that was very comparable to what you would have seen in the National American League or the Negro Leagues at that time. And here we're talking about basically the first half or so of the 20th century. And the 1927 Yankees or the Yankees teams of the late 30s would have beaten the best PCL teams. But the better PCL teams would have beaten the St. Louis Browns, the Philadelphia Athletics, the Philadelphia Phillies. Rough decade for Philadelphia at that time, right? So they were not a minor league. There was no relationship. It was not affiliated till later on with different major league teams. And this is important because this is a big part of our baseball legacy here in San Francisco. When I first started going to Giants games in the 1970s, older Giants fans would make a point of imparting this valuable piece of wisdom to me. And they would say, we had baseball here before the Giants. It was really important to them to make that point about the memory of the PCL. So I want to really stress that. But I'd like to raise a couple of other things about the PCL. And one was the team we had here for the best team, the San Francisco team, was the San Francisco Seals. And I noticed somebody with a Seals t-shirt on. And when I was writing one of my baseball books, I talked to the guy from Ebbets Field Flannels. Those of you who spend too much money on baseball things are probably familiar with Ebbets Field Flannels, the old-time baseball. And I said, I have a theory. I just want you to give some data on this. And I said, I kind of think that the Seals play a cultural role in San Francisco that the Dodgers do in Brooklyn. It's a way of longer-term residents to connect to an older iteration of the city, and for newer residents to claim some kind of knowledge of being like a real San Franciscan. And he said, our Seals products outsell pretty much the rest of the PCL combined. So this is the team that had the longest legacy from the PCL. Part of the reason is they were by far the best team in the PCL. They were regular pennant winners. They were the Yankees of the PCL. They won all the time. They had great players, great fan base. Now, today, we all know that our rivals are the Dodgers, right? The San Francisco Giants and the Los Angeles Dodgers have a rivalry that goes back well over a century and starts on the other side of the country. At this time, the Seals' rival was not the LA teams. It was the Oakland Oaks across the bay. And there are stories, I, of course, never did this, but of doubleheaders beginning in Seal Stadium and ending up in Oakland. And taking the ferry, like the players, the fans, the writers, everyone take the ferry, drinking the whole time, like 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock. This sounds like fun, right? I mean, that would be great. I don't know how we'll do that, especially the A's unfortunately have left. But that's what baseball should be, right? So it was a very heated rivalry, but a lot of fun. And both cities were proud of their teams, the San Francisco more because they were better. Lefty O'Doul was perhaps, John Leonidakis has a new documentary about Lefty O'Doul, which you should all see when it's available. But Lefty O'Doul was, a hugely important baseball figure. He was a two-way player who ultimately became just a hitter. Lifetime major league batting average of .349, primarily, oddly enough, with the New York Giants, right? So there's becomes the San Francisco connection later. Longtime manager of the Seals. Years ago, I interviewed Dianne Feinstein for a book about the Giants, and she said, Lefty O'Doul was like the biggest sports celebrity here in the city when she was growing up. He wasn't playing anymore. He was the manager. By the time she was really growing up, he was the manager. And he led the Seals to a number of pennants and was really the first major, in terms of playing on a team here, San Francisco star in that sense. But of course, there's more to it than that. We talked about the rivalry with the Oaks, and we talked about this, right? Then there was another team, the Mission Reds. 1926 to 1937, they played here in the Mission, and they did not have the traction that the Seals had, and they eventually left town. But that was another team. So this was a two-team town for about a decade. And then, I can't see it, my glasses doesn't work. The Sea Lions. So the racial politics of the PCL were a little more complicated, but not that much more than the than the National American League in their exclusionary politics. And the Sea Lions were a short-lived attempt by African-American entrepreneurs to build an African-American, like a West Coast version of the Negro Leagues, which were largely in the Midwest and the South and the East Coast. Came out here. Now, if you look closely, we know the history of racism in Major League Baseball. We know that after Moses Fleetwood Walker was basically drummed out of the game in the 1880s, that it was not until Jackie Robinson played for any National or American League team anyone was allowed to play who was African American. But if you were starting a new division, if you will, of the Negro Leagues, what's wrong with choosing that date? Any thoughts? Right, exactly. Robinson comes in the next year, and that's kind of that. But it was a brief part of the history. And you notice the Seals, the Sea Lions, you're seeing a theme here. Undoubtedly, if we'd had some kind of a contest to name the Giants when they came here, rather than, keep the name, they would have been called the Seals or the Walrus or something like that. The Walrus would have been kind of cool. The other thing I want to talk about San Francisco is that there's a history of so many great players who came from here, particularly in the early part of the 20th century, and particularly Italian American. So part of our baseball history is Italian American baseball history. And we know some of them. And because this is San Francisco, you're going to see I couldn't get this information for everybody, but their high school as well as who they were. So we have here Ping Bodie. Remember this guy? Ping Bodie was an outfielder. Wasn't much of a hitter. He was born Stefano Pezzolo. So you see that he was probably Italian. And he played with the Yankees. He was Babe Ruth. Would go in and play defense for Babe Ruth in the late innings. Not exactly know where he went to high school, but probably Galileo. Dolph Camilli, who was a pretty good hitting middle infielder, who went to Sacred Heart. Joe Cronin, another Sacred Heart. That's a pretty good middle infield to get out. Joe Cronin was a Hall of Fame shortstop. Played mostly with the Red Sox and the Washington Senators. Longtime baseball executive. And he also went to Sacred Heart. Frank Crosetti, who grew up in Santa Clara. Now, Frank Crosetti is an interesting character here because, one, you're beginning to see a team emerge here that's pulling a lot of players out of San Francisco, the Yankees. Crosetti was a longtime coach, immortalized in Ball 4, the Jim Bouton's seminal baseball book, but also was kind of like used to drive across the country with Joe DiMaggio to spring training, and he would say, Joe DiMaggio would get in the car in San Francisco, get out in Florida, and not say a word the rest of the time, which we know the kind of arc of Joe DiMaggio's life, but this is the kind of young, shy rookie. Joe DiMaggio probably never been out of San Francisco much. Then we have a graduate of Mission High School, Babe Dahlgren. And does anyone know the kind of interesting piece of trivia about Babe Dahlgren? Yes, Charles.
He played first base after Gary Streak ended.
That's right. He was the Yankees' first baseman after Lou Gehrig's streak ended. Thank you, Charles. Right. That's a pretty significant piece of baseball history right there. Now, we have three brothers, Joe, Vince, and Dom DiMaggio, who are really the most famous, Joe, and the most famous baseball son of San Francisco, all went to Galileo. Why do you think a lot of these guys went to Galileo? That should be straightforward. That was if you lived in North Beach, grew up in North Beach, that was your high school. Harry Heilman, a product of Sacred Heart. Harry Heilman was a fantastic hitter. 342 lifetime batting average, about 180 home runs, Hall of Famer, really a truly great player. He was a teammate in the same outfield of Ty Cobb, for a number of years. Also a product of San Francisco, went to Sacred Heart. Willie Cam, one of the more, again, we don't know exactly where he went to high school. Willie Cam was a third baseman, 287 batting average, mostly with the White Sox and Cleveland, so not like a big name star. From 1923 to 1935. I want to talk about Tony Lazzari, also went to Galileo. So Lazzari, DiMaggio, Pezzolo, Crosetti, Dahlgren are all Yankees coming from this part of the country. Lazzari is perhaps the best baseball player to have lived through the 1906 earthquake here in San Francisco. He was a very young baby at the time. And also a teammate, alumni of Galileo High School. Joe DiMaggio and Tony Lazzari are the only two Hall of Famers not related to each other who went to the same high school and later went on to be teammates on two World Series winning teams. So I'm now giving you several pieces. I've given you two, and Charles has given you one piece of relatively obscure baseball trivia. Lefty O'Doul, about whom we've spoken quite a bit, went to Bayview, and Gus Surr, who played for Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, who was a first baseman, in the 30s, who hit about 280. So that's kind of the pre-Giants. I mean, we're doing broad brush here because we don't have a lot of time. We're covering, 180 years and 40 minutes, so if you do the math. But that's kind of an overview of some of the interesting things about pre-Giants baseball in San Francisco. And so now we're going to move on a little bit. And we're going to talk about the National League comes to San Francisco. And you may have seen this headline before, we murder the Bums, right? That's what happens when you beat the Dodgers. And the first game ever in San Francisco, in California, the first National League game, our some first weekend document, is here at Seal Stadium. Ruben Gomez pitches. Gino Cimoli, the first lead-up batter for the Dodgers that day, is a San Franciscan who went to Galileo. And the Giants win 10-0. So we now have baseball in San Francisco. But before we do that, I want to go back to one of those other San Franciscans we talked about. Dom DiMaggio was probably the second best fielding center fielder in the 1940s in the American League. Behind, of course, his brother. And probably the second best of the DiMaggio brothers. Also a San Franciscan. And he was asked about the Giants coming to San Francisco. And he says, the Giants would be very popular the first 3 years. After that, the shine would be off. And after a while, even the ushers wouldn't know if the team stayed in 8th place every year. And he was making the argument that moving to baseball to San Francisco, it would work as long as the Giants were good. And when they stopped being good, fans would lose interest. He said there was not that organic connection. It was pretty prescient. That's exactly what happened. And this is Dom DiMaggio said this in 1953 because the rumors of baseball coming west had begun already. He said that in 54, sorry. The move itself occurs after the 1957 season. The Giants come out here in 1958. And just to make a couple of points about this, there's so much about this move. And you could read my book, Baseball Goes West, if you want to hear my extended take on this. But to summarize some of the key things about this, the area where both the Giants and Dodgers playing in Brooklyn, playing in the city, in New York City, had really changed from being ethnic white neighborhoods, Irish, Italian, and Jewish, to being African American. And one of the kind of odd ways that the history of baseball in New York is told is that somehow the Yankees were the imperial team and the other two teams left. When the area around Yankee Stadium had the similar demographic shift, the fans kept going. And they didn't in Brooklyn and the Giants, which were already the third team in New York by then. So when you hear those self-righteous people saying, oh, when the Dodgers left, Walter O'Malley this, if you've been okay going to ballpark in a neighborhood with black people, the Dodgers might have stayed in Brooklyn. This is really something that's overlooked a lot about this and the kind of self-righteousness of that. I think this move was essential for making baseball truly a national game. And really revolutionized baseball, really for the better. And the engine behind this was, in fact, Walter O'Malley, because what O'Malley understood was the two things. One, there was a lot of money to be made in L.A., and he wanted to get to L.A. in that market. What he also understood was that you couldn't just move one team. It didn't make sense at that time. The finances didn't make sense. He wanted to bring the rivalry, so he had to bring the Giants with him, too. Now, by the late 50s, the Giants won the World Series in 1954. By 1956 and 1957, their attendance is again terrible. The Dodgers, great team, win the World Series in 55, and the attendance is falling off. So there was a rationale, certainly for the Giants leaving. At one point, they almost went to Minneapolis, where they'd had a minor league team. There was a rationale for the Dodgers doing something. Robert Moses had proposed building a ballpark in eastern Queens for the Dodgers. And Walter O'Malley dismissed that as crazy. Of course, it's exactly where Citi Field is now because he understood that people from Long Island needed to be able to get in easily to see the ball games. But they moved, and O'Malley gave Stoneham the choice. And Stoneham, being kind of an urban, sophisticated guy, understood there's really only one city in the West Coast of the United States, so he wanted to come to San Francisco. The numbers probably wasn't the right decision from a financial, but from a moral perspective, it was. And that's how the long story of how the Giants kind of ended up here. And when they ended up here, they were a good team. And they had Willie Mays playing center field. And Willie Mays, of course, is the greatest player of the post-war era and perhaps ever. And had a complicated relationship with the city of San Francisco for a whole lot of reasons, right? First, we were talking about this with somebody here earlier, but when he tried to buy a house in the city, he was not allowed to because they tried to stop it because he was African American and the neighbors were white. Does anyone know who the realtor was on that purchase, trying to buy that house with Willie Mays? What? Yep, John Barbagelata, who ran for mayor against George Moscone in 1975. So this is extraordinary. My mother and Willie and Charles both getting baseball trivia questions. That was a given. My mother pulling one out was impressive. But yes, John Barbagelata. And when the Giants became chronic underachievers, which happened early on here in people's perceptions, they blamed Willie Mays. We saw that in the 80s, early 80s, when the Giants were losing, they blamed Jack Clark because he's the only guy who could hit, so he probably should hit a home run every time he was up, right? It's not how baseball works. Frank Conniff, the journalist, this is in 1959, described San Francisco as the damnedest city. They boo Willie Mays and they cheer Khrushchev, referring to Khrushchev's speech at the Longshoremen's Union Hall. But today, in the last decade or really 25 years of his life, Mays was understood here in the city as a national treasure that he was. But it wasn't really until at least the 1990s when he displaced Willie McCovey as the most beloved giant in the city's history, because McCovey had never played in the East Coast. He started his career here, and it had a different impact. The other thing that made the Giants really significant, I think, in this moment in the development of baseball is this. They were groundbreaking in bringing in Latino stars, particularly dark-skinned Latino players. So Orlando Cepeda, right? Roberto Clemente is, understood as the kind of national baseball hero rightly, of Puerto Rico. But it was not until the late 60s when he was understood to be better than Orlando Cepeda. For much of that time, Cepeda was considered the real star for many Puerto Rican fans. And he, of course, began his career here, was Rookie of the Year in 1958 with the Giants, and then had a problem the following year because they then developed an even better first baseman, Willie McCovey, and they ended up trading him away in a terrible trade, Cepeda. But also all three Alou brothers, Felipe, Matty, and Jesus. Matty, just to go back to that 1962 clip, Matty Alou was on third base, and Felipe Alou had not gotten down a bunt. If he had gotten down that bunt, Alou would have scored. His brother would have scored on Mays' double. They would have tied the game, and Felipe Alou still will sometimes talk about how upset he is that he couldn't get that bunt down. Juan Marichal, of course, the great, great Dominican pitcher. Many of the other players who we think of as having played on any teams, Manny Mota, who we think of as 102 years old, pinch hitting for the Dodgers, and if you all remember the movie Airplane, now batting for Pedro Borbon, Manny Mota started with the Giants. So they were really the first team to really scout and bring these players in, and that really contributed to that. And then to make it more interesting, in 1964, Masanori Murakami, the first Japanese player. The Giants clubhouse in 1964 and 1965 was one of the most diverse workplaces in the United States of America. African Americans, white guys, many Latino guys from different places, a Japanese dude. And this was possible, Murakami, baseball played in Japan for a long time at this point, but it was much easier for a Japanese player to have a go at it here on the West Coast, where there were Japanese communities, people. Obviously, the legacy of the internment camps for Japanese was pretty recent, so there was a very complicated political project. And then I just want to talk about, briefly, the ballparks, because I mentioned the 3-ballpark walk. And part of the challenge that the Giants had is that Seal Stadium, which is the headline in the newspaper there, you can see that Seal Stadium, was a great ballpark, but it wasn't big enough. Just wasn't big enough. And they needed a bigger ballpark, and Stoneham was obsessed with parking places. He wanted 10,000 parking places for 10,000 cars. So they began a long process where they ended up building Candlestick Park relatively quickly. They started there in 1960. Vice President Richard Nixon, remember him? There was a time when we thought having a crook in the White House meant having Richard Nixon in the White House. That feels like it's a different world. Richard Nixon goes to opening day there. This is the state-of-the-art, beautiful ballpark. It didn't quite work out, the Candlestick Park. It turned out to really be dreadful. It was, I guess that's a technical term, but it was too cold. It was windy. It was out of the way. It was huge. It was multi-purpose. It never worked as a ballpark. And beginning relatively soon, so they start in 60, within 12 years, the talk begins, 14 years really, are they going to move? Can we get a new ballpark? And that goes on for the last quarter of the 20th century. So you're never really sure what's going to happen with this team. Obviously, at some point, in 1996, they decide to start building Oracle Park. That begins to move forward, and we're in a different, we get to the new ballpark. But this challenge here really characterizes what I think is kind of a forgotten period in Giants history, and I call it between the Bonzes. So if you look at these photographs, you'll see two players, father and son. Bobby Bonds is the top image. That's the father. Barry Bonds is the son. Barry Bonds we all know about. Bobby Bonds, for those of you who don't know, was an excellent player in his own right. Really excellent player. He was, a power and speed guy, the kind of mode of Willie Mays. Wasn't nearly as good as Willie Mays, but, relative 5 times, gets 30 home runs and 30 stolen bases back when that was a real oddity in his career. Solid defender, very good player. Struggled with his demons, and that generation of African-American players faced a lot of challenges that are often overlooked by the kind of racial history of Major League Baseball. And he's traded away after the 1974 season to the Yankees for Bobby Mercer, who hated playing in Candlestick Park more than any other player. in Giants history. According to Mike Murphy, the longtime Giants clubhouse guru, he said Bobby Mercer would come in after striking out and say, "Can we blow this ballpark up?" He just hated it. And then after the following 1992 season, they signed Barry Bonds, the kind of the modern era of Giants history. But there's this period in between where the Giants are really struggling. And it begins in the early 70s. Within about an 18-month period, they send away 4 Hall of Famers. They trade Gaylord Perry to Cleveland for sudden Sam McDowell, which was one of the worst trades ever. They trade Willie McCovey to San Diego for Mike Caldwell, who by the late 70s was actually a pretty good pitcher, but that didn't work out. They basically release Juan Marichal, but he was done anyway, and they send Willie Mays to the Mets for Charlie Williams, basically as a kind of opportunity for Mays to go back to New York, but for the last year and a half of his career, but it really takes the spirit out of the Giants. They're now directionless. The post-Willie Mays Giants are supposed to be led by Bobby Bonds, but he's not that guy, although he's a very good player. And the team is kind of adrift. But on top of everything, now they're playing in Candlestick Park. And they've been there for a while. It's not new. It's still, the weather hasn't changed. The neighborhood, it's still far away. And it's just not working. By 74, 5, and 6, they have absolutely, the attendance is absolutely, and the attendance is just 73, 4, 5, 6. The attendance is absolutely in the toilet, right? Early in 1976, actually, we talked about this in one of my earlier talks here, the day George Moscone is inaugurated as mayor, the Toronto headlines in the Toronto newspapers. Why are we talking about Toronto? Let's talk about San Francisco. We have Major League Baseball. The Giants are moving to Toronto. So that was not, they might, not there's a rumor. This is happening. And of course, Mayor Moscone had to really scramble to keep the team here during his first few months as mayor, which of course he successfully does. But that's how bad it was. There was a certainty they're not going to be here. And for the next 15 years, more than that, really until the mid-93, really, that period, that uncertainty never leaves. So this is a between the bonds period. Even when they're good, you don't know how long they're going to be here. And there's all kinds of rumors. Are they going to build a domed stadium? Are they going to build a new stadium downtown? Are they going to leave? But the guy who saved the team, who we shouldn't forget, is Bob Lurie. And Bob Lurie plays an odd role in the team's history because some younger fans see him as the guy that almost sent the team to Tampa. But I don't think that's entirely fair. He really worked hard to try to keep the team here. And ultimately, when the ownership group came together to buy the team, he worked very closely with them to make sure they could stay here and lent them some money. But he also came in immediately with half the money to keep the team here in early 1976, and then could not find anyone else because he couldn't get, and this Bob Lurie, very well connected in wealthy San Francisco, couldn't find anyone to contribute to buy their share. He needed another $4 million. And one of the most wealthy, well-connected businessmen in the city couldn't come up with somebody to invest $4 million. Just think about that today. Multiply that number by 10. You'd still be able to find a lot of people, right? Bud Herseth eventually joins him to buy the team. Bud Herseth knew nothing about baseball, but he put $4 million up. A year later, the National League team says, this guy can't be part of the ownership group. Bob Lurie buys him out for $4.5 million. So he becomes really the full owner of the team. A lot goes on. We're not going to go year from year, but we are going to talk about the worst Giants teams in history. The Giants have been around since the 1880s, and they were never this bad as they were in the mid-1980s. 1984, 1985, they lose 100 games. The team is completely directionless. The ballpark is terrible. They're a laughing stock. Every mediocre player from that era passes, even some good players, but if they were good, they're way. Phil Garner, who was a pretty solid infielder for many years, ends his career here doing just when he's completely done. Just a, terrible team, a series of terrible managers. Frank Robinson would get so frustrated, you could see he just wanted to grab a bat and hit the damn ball himself. It was that kind of a period. And by the end of 1985, it was a very frustrating time. And these were very bad teams. Again, we're not going to go blow by blow. But there was something else going on there at that time, which is that the Giants in this period were really struggling to connect with the city. I was in high school in the early 1980s and a big Giants fan, and people thought that me and the handful of guys in the class who were big baseball fans It was it was like being into bonsai, Japanese bonsai. It was just some odd hobby that we had, right? It was like, oh, he's into cooking, Basque food or something. Just something very strange and offbeat about it. There are a lot of things strange and offbeat about me, but this was one of the things they thought was strange and offbeat. And there was no connection, but it was kind of the default team. When they were good, people paid attention, but there was no connection of this is our team. It just never felt that way during this period. It had been so long since they'd been good. Going out to Candlestick Park was like a psychological endurance test. Every time you did it, you couldn't have enough warm clothes because you lived in San Francisco. You were going to like buy special clothes to wear to the ball game in August. It just didn't make sense. And they just never really connected by the city, which is why the rumors that they were leaving never ended. First, they were going to Denver. Then they were going to play half their home games in the Oakland ballpark but still call themselves the San Francisco Giants, right? Then they were going to build a dome stadium. So there was no sense of the future, and the team was not good. So here's where I want to go back. We're not going to go all the way back, but that video we talked about Starling Connect to the city and Will Clark and the revival of the franchise. So Will Clark spends 1985, a little bit in the minor leagues. He was drafted out of Mississippi State University, hits pretty well. Opening day, 1986, Will Clark is on the Giants, playing first base, and he is leading off because who knows. And on the first at-bat against future Hall of Famer Nolan Ryan in the Houston Astrodome, he hits the ball out of the park. Now, since that time, the Giants have had 3 World Series winners. They've been in and around the playoffs in other years. They've had some bad teams. They've never been a laughingstock since. That moment turned the vibe of the Giants around, and we still feel it. Like I said earlier, we can go through the numbers, and I tell you why Will Clark is a better player than a lot of Hall of Famers. But his impact on this team and this city should not be understated. Hugely important in that respect, just from a baseball perspective. And then, of course, other things happen, right? So in 1987, they win the division, almost win the pennant. I still think would have beat the Twins in that World Series. We can never prove or disprove that. 2 years later, we're at that video I showed very early on where they finally win the pennant for the first time in 27 years. The best thing we can say about that earthquake was it took the A's longer than 4 days to beat them because there was a major earthquake midway or just before the beginning of Game 3, which was the first World Series game played in Candlestick Park since Bobby Richardson caught that line drive. Can I tell you just one quick story about that World Series? So the World Series is disrupted. They don't play Game 3 that day. Was anyone here at that game? A couple of you, so you know what was happening at the Stick. And the A's go to the East Bay, or the A's go to Arizona and practice. Like they're doing batting practice. The Giants are trying to dig people out from the rubble. And Fay Vincent, who had become commissioner because Bart Giamatti had suddenly died earlier in the year, is trying to figure out what to do. And he calls a meeting with the Giants about what to do because they have to finish the World Series 3 games in San Francisco. That's what the schedule calls for. They're not quite ready yet. So at the meeting is Vincent, obviously somebody from his office, I don't know who. Lurie's right-hand man for kind of non-direct baseball operations, Corey Bush, who was here tonight but wasn't feeling great, and Art Agnos. Now, if you know anything about those characters, one of those guys is kind of a mild, soft-spoken guy. The other, especially the younger iteration of him, a bit of a hothead. And both Art, Corey, and Bob told me this story. And they told me the same way. And so Fay Vincent says, now I want all of you to take a deep breath, okay? And I want you to connect with your San Francisco self and your baseball friend self. Take yourself back to 1989. You've waited 27 years, maybe your whole life as a baseball fan, to get the Giants in the World Series. In your heart, you know the A's are better. Maybe you got tickets to the game, though. You just want to see the Giants play. They didn't do well, but we know what happened. Fay Vincent says, well, and then meanwhile, it's bedlam. The earthquake, people, you can't get power, it's a mess. Fay Vincent says, well, I don't think you're going, I would hate for you to be the first mayor who had to cancel the World Series in your hometown. And Art Agnos says, and I would hate to play the World Series while we're still digging bodies out of the rubble. And Fay Vincent says, well, I think what we're going to do is move, such a bad idea, is move the World Series to San Diego. Okay. And soft-spoken Bob Lurie stands up, and I heard this from all of them. All three of them separately told me this. Pounds his fist on the table and says, over my goddamn dead body, are you moving this World Series to San Diego? After what these fans have been through, we are playing this World Series here. It sits back down. And we did. We didn't win. It was ugly. Kurt Manwaring, I think, got like the biggest hit for that. It was a bad World Series. The wrong team won. The better team won, but the wrong team won. Mark's back there. No, I don't know. I think the right team won. But Jed is too. But we played it here. And that speaks to, I think, the beginning of what Argnos later referred to me as that chemical bond between the city and the team. Of course, following the 1992 season, we now get the news they're moving to Tampa. And then this game of are the Giants leaving or are they staying enters its final round. Frank Jordan, the former beat cop who made sure Tony Kubek and Bobby Richardson made it safely out of town, is now the mayor, and he helps put this deal together with the understanding that down the pike there'll be a new ballpark. And that brings us to our last, I think our penultimate slide, but our last substantive slide. The move to Tampa. Baseball in San Francisco in the 21st century. You all know this ballpark. If you don't, this is the new ballpark. This is the best ballpark in the major leagues. And I'm not just saying that as a Giants fan, but this ballpark does a lot of things. First of all, it is a truly spectacular place to see a baseball game. And it is the only ballpark I've been to that has free valet parking for your bicycle. And it really does. And it has good food. And you can easily get there on public transportation. You don't have to get on the Ballpark Express, which was fun, but a wild ride. If you remember the Ballpark Express from the 70s and 80s, you never knew how much it was going to cost, what route it was going to take, what the final stop would be. It was kind of like good luck with that. And this really guarantees the Giants a revenue base, guarantees the Giants will be taken seriously, and really connects the Giants to the city in a different way. And this ballpark is why. So that lack of the bond is never an issue again after this ballpark is built. And one last thought on Art Agnos, because following that 1989 earthquake, Art lost his re-election in 1991, and the issue that cost him that re-election was because he refused to rebuild the Embarcadero Freeway and began to tear it down. That completely revitalized this neighborhood, the whole kind of southeast corner of San Francisco, right? It was such the right thing to do. And sometimes people's reputations get better and better as time goes by. But that was really Agnos' call. So Agnos wasn't mayor when this was built. He didn't put this together, but he was instrumental in kind of laying the foundation, pardon the pun, for making this happen. Another thing happens, though, which is less, in my mind, less happy, which is the decline and ultimate departure of the A's. And for years, as if you were a fan in San Francisco, it was great because it was a two-team market. You could get on the BART, or if you're older, drive and go and see whatever team you wanted when they came to play the A's, or the other way around. If you were an A's fan, you could see teams in both leagues. This is back when we had different leagues in Major League Baseball. But gradually, they're run poorly, and they eventually leave town, leaving an opportunity for the Giants to take over what is now one of the biggest single-team markets and really become a big spending team. We haven't seen that yet, but that's perhaps the next chapter I'd like it to be. And then it's just more the kind of connecting with the city. It is the Giants, even though the Warriors have been quite good on and off for the last 20 years or so, and the 49ers have made it to the Super Bowl a couple times. I don't understand why they didn't understand the rules for overtime, but why would a head coach in the NFL need to know that? I don't know. But the Giants have become the signature franchise in the Bay Area, and that wasn't true. And they have remained that, really the trajectory beginning with Will Clark's home run off of Nolan Ryan, running through the new ownership group, the new ballpark, and the 2010 World Series. Anyway, we will go to question and answer. I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight here. And that's my information. If you need or want to reach me in any way, you can follow me at Substack, Kibitzing with Lincoln, where I write about baseball, politics, San Francisco, all the good things. And that's my website, and that's my email. So thank you again. And I will now take some questions. So go ahead, and you can bring the mic.
I was just wondering what your thought on WBC is. Buster Posey thinks there's a rhythm gap with spring training, game ready, spring training, game ready, and Webb is kind of showing that.
Oh, he certainly is. The WBC is baseball at its finest. I've seen the WBC in Brooklyn. I've seen it in San Diego. I've seen it here. I just was in Miami for a few games just last month. So it is the kind of thing baseball needs to do to build out its fan base. Nonetheless, Posey's not wrong. And it's a particularly complicated dynamic for pitchers, right, as we see. You know, I don't know if that's, I know Paul Skeens struggled a little bit early on in his season. I think there's a way to solve this. So maybe you do, we've talked about a 2-week break. You're not doing it every year anyway, but a 2-week break during, the All-Star break to expand that. Maybe you find other ways. So for some of the first rounds, they did some of this. You don't need to, a guy like Logan Webb, the United States team does not need Logan Webb or pitchers of that caliber to get out of pool play. They really shouldn't, so you could do those as bullpen games. I would be really hesitant to abandon the World Baseball Classic. This is the thing that, when you go and see how fans from other countries get excited about the baseball and how it brings in young people, I think it's great.
Does that website have information on early ballparks?
No.
Can you scroll back to that? Early ballpark?
No, I don't have my clicker, so I can't. But I write about a lot of things, and baseball's only one of them, so I don't have particular information on early ballparks.
Great talk, and I appreciate, going through the history of this because I was there for part of it. But, thinking about the history of San Francisco and baseball, if you were to kind of look forward, do you have any thoughts about, as we look into, the next half of the 21st century, what is and or should San Francisco be doing to help grow? And I know you mentioned maybe a little bit about finances, but now that the A's are gone, is there some other opportunity for San Francisco and for Giants to grow that?
Well, the first thing I would say in growing baseball in general is find ways to bring girls and women into the game. I said this very early on as kind of a principled thing that I think is the original sin of baseball, but if you push away half of your potential fans, and there are plenty of women fans, right? I'm not saying there aren't, but give girls a chance to play the game. The softball, and there's documented, this creates kind of sexist trope, girls can't hit a fastball or some nonsense like that. So that's the first thing I would say. Second thing is, the Giants, there's a line that we're told about small market teams and big market teams. All of these people have enough money to do whatever they want. And the Giants now have a chance to really make that we're going to compete, this Dodgers team, who knows, but we're going to compete with the Dodgers, the Yankees, the Mets. We are going to stop telling ourselves we're a small or a medium market team. And then I think that they have to take, I like, Jung-Hoo Lee did not work out, but the strategy did. You got to roll the dice sometimes. And to build out, so it is not great that if you go to Japan, you see more Dodgers hats than anybody else. First of all, it just gets you crazy. But secondly, that's not great for the Giants, right? So to kind of think of how to build out, and I know Jung-Hoo Lee was an attempt to do that, but it didn't work. So those are some of the things from the kind of, and then I think Major League Baseball Giants are part of that, has to think about how to create their product and market their product in this changing technical and economic environment.
Do you think Barry Bonds will ever make it into the Hall of Fame?
No, I think he should be. That's a different question, right? There's a thought, on the one hand, as some of the older voters age out, that you could see some of these special committees at some point. But remember, the committees is a selectorate. This is about as democratic process as how, the country of Iran chooses its leadership. And obviously, it's the wrong moment to make jokes like that. But we're going to put a committee together, and then we're going to decide, and then Harold Baines is in the Hall of Fame. If anyone thinks Harold Baines is a better player than Will Clark, that's just absurd, right? But the hope is that as people age out, and also as people get in touch with just how widespread this was, how many home runs Barry Bonds hit off of pitchers who were using PEDs, which no one ever talks about. So I would hope so. And, Barry Bonds, there are reasons to keep people out of the Hall of Fame. For my money, it's a bad pun, Pete Rose's gambling is not the reason. Pete Rose's sexual predation is, right? So I'm comfortable with Bonds because he kind of played the game the way it was played at the time. So I'm not comfortable with the hypocrisy of people keeping him out. So I would hope so. I would maybe say there's a 2 in 5 chance in the next 30 years, which is a very back of the envelope calculation.
What is the yield and income of the San Francisco Giants from how much recently and in the past?
The teams never open their books because they don't want us to know that. But it's a pretty lucrative business. And one of the reasons they don't want us to know this is when they enter into the negotiations around the collective bargaining agreement, they want to say, oh, we're all losing money. The Giants are not losing money. I don't know the numbers.
I would like to know what you think of what I think is really indicative of San Francisco baseball history. What do you think of the crazy crab?
That is a great question. So, for those who don't know, can I give a little overview here? For those who don't know, in the mid-1980s, the Giants were desperate. To paraphrase Larry Baer, the longtime executive, how do we get warm butts into cold seats? And because attendance was bad, the team was bad, and they created this mascot called the Crab. And I would describe the Crab as a grown man in a crab suit who would come out in the 5th inning, dance. For some reason, I recollect him dancing along the first base foul line, not the third base foul line, but maybe he did both. But for me, it was always the first base line, dancing to some inane music. And the phone was da 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 da. Love that crazy crab. And I had a friend in high school who would do that to me in the hallways between classes, right? Because this was the same period. It was a great, to me, that's the kind of thing I love about baseball. That a team can make you were supposed to boo him. That was the other thing. You were supposed to boo the crazy crab. Eventually, they phased out the crazy crab because people were throwing things at the crazy crab. I'm sorry? Players too. And now at the new ballpark, if you go to center field, you can get a really good crab sandwich. I don't know if it's made out of that crab. But I think on the one hand, it's one of the things I love about baseball, right? But in a more, to get to York, and obviously the crab, the connection to San Francisco, because we get great crab here, and there's so many different, not only is it crab good to eat, tasty, but there's so many different ways to prepare it, reflecting the ethnic diversity of San Francisco, right? And that even, basically the German Jews here all eat crab anyway, because, so everyone's eating crab here, right? But it also is a reflection, the first time that I think they really began to think of San Francisco as a quirky place, as an interesting, quirky place where we have to do interesting, quirky things to keep the fans. I want to make, and I think a connection maybe you're not expecting, but an important one, to Tim Lincecum. Tim Lincecum was not a crab. Tim Lincecum was a human being, is a human being, and was one of the great pitchers in Giants history. That game where you saw where Brian Wilson is striking out the batter in the last inning, Tim Lincecum started that game and pitched 8 fantastic innings, right? 2 Cy Young awards, 2 no-hitters, a wonderful, wonderful player, had hair down to here, and, it was last seen like an anti-Trump march, right? My kind of pitcher. And a great personality. So when they won the World Series in 2010, I won't say it quotely, but he was interviewed in the pennant, and he yells into the mic, F yeah, except he says the word, and that gets kind of some buzz. Gets caught for marijuana possession twice, and everyone around the ballpark is selling T-shirts saying, let Timmy smoke. And for me, that's, a lot of teams would have cracked down on him, made him cut his hair, and that the Giants never did that. The kind of origin of that, the germ of that idea, starts with the crazy crab.
How do you think we should get more blacks into the game? Because I'm from Alabama, as my sister is, and you don't want to miss out on the next Mays, McCovey, Aaron, Satchel Paige.
It's a complicated question. The racial politics, racial demography of baseball is complicated also because, so the number of African Americans in the game is not reflective of the population of the United States. The proportion of African Americans among American-born players gets close to that. So the problem, you see what I'm saying? So the problem is not, part of the problem is that I think a lot of people don't understand that from the perspective of money, it's more lucrative to play baseball than other sports. However, there's not college scholarships. So that's part of the problem. Also, as baseball has become, more and more of the American-born players, this is not somebody finding, just pick a name at random, Harmon Killebrew, who was white, but still, in Idaho somewhere, or, Bob Feller, or later African-American players like Willie McCovey, or Henry Aaron. It's not scouted like that, or, a lot of these guys come through college now, and baseball has become a game where the kind of recruiting and scouting begins so young, and to be part of that process requires money. So it's really, my son's played ball with a guy who's now in the Yankees, and his parents had, upper middle class people from a very young age kind of reoriented their lives around supporting his baseball pursuits. And you have to have real resources to do that. Travel baseball is expensive, and private coaching, there was never private coaching, even when I was growing up, is now kind of de rigueur, so that now you could support that. You can create programs to support that. You can put funds into that. It doesn't seem to me that Major League Baseball is into that. Just now, the Texas Rangers, who lost that 2010 World Series, had put their statue up of the Texas Ranger, not the baseball team, but the law enforcement, who famously had been photographed back in the 1960s, standing there looking casual as a summer day next to an African-American man being lynched. And when local groups complained, Major League Baseball said nothing. So I don't really think this is an organization that on racial politics is particularly progressive, so they're not really thinking about those things, but there are ways to do it, but you have to invest money and be serious about it. All right. Thank you so much. This was a pleasure. Very great talking.